Consider supporting Archaeosoup on Patreon for as little as $1 per month. Link available in the video description. Hello and welcome back to another Digging the Game. In this series we play computer games as archaeologists, and today I'm diving back into Hyrule, courtesy of Zelda Breath of the Wild. This is part 5 in our ongoing series examining the archaeology of this wonderful computer game, and here I am on the road, east-ish of the Great Plateau, on the way out of the or from the gatepost town ruins, or the outpost town ruins, across Proxim Bridge and then towards the Dueling Peaks, which we can see just behind me. And I think we've seen these in a previous video when I ended up examining this area here, the Ash Swamp, in I think video 2, and I will be talking about that in a moment. But we begin our journey today with this giant ruin of a tree up on the hillside. Now this huge tree, I suspect, is, well, quite obviously part of the story of this landscape, but more than that, I think this tree may well help us to understand a key question surrounding what we're about to see. Well, this tree actually and others. Now the tree obviously is huge. Here is a normal tree, even though it is actually snapped and broken. In fact, lots of the trees around here appear to have suffered some sort of great trauma. I wonder why that is. But nonetheless, this is a very substantial tree. Now, in terms of in-game history, I'm tempted to refer to the sort of the Great Deku tree that we see in Zelda Ocarina of Time, for example. But actually, that tree has seemingly a descendant in the Great Hyrule Forest in this game. So actually maybe this is a different forest. Even though the tree is huge, it's not necessarily the same family, as it were, of that tree, of the Deku tree. But here's the seemingly the stump of the tree. Something snapped this thing into and left it rotting on the hillside, and also caused all these other trees just to be broken. Now maybe this is a historic impact of some sort that caused a crater. This crater is huge. This is the Daya Lake, and I don't think it was always a lake, because you see in the Daya Lake, in this crater, we have the Deya Village Ruins. Now this area for me is one of the most interesting parts of the game, archaeologically speaking, that is, because it gives us quite an insight into, well, first of all, actually, building and architectural design choices. We have buildings which are seemingly triple planked. So we have an interior vertical planking with a wall made up of logs and beams, and then we have on the exterior another layer of vertical planking. Very neat windows, and also seemingly pitched roofs, all sat upon a stone base. So even before this crater flooded as much as it did, it seems that the water table was quite high, or maybe it was prone to flooding anyway, and these people decided to build these houses on little stone platforms. In fact, we have some steps here just leading up to what possibly was the front door just here. Now that's kind of cool. If you compare that to the log cabin that we saw in the previous video in part 4 on the Great Plateau, I said then that the structure that we saw there was similar to buildings that we saw in other parts of Hyrule, and it was similar, but actually that building, that cabin, had gaps between the logs in the wall for chinking, for mud and stones to fill in those gaps, whereas these structures have no gaps between the logs of the wall. This is actually probably a fairly airtight and watertight construction method, especially with the triple layering, and presumably with all this water around, it was required. Now there is an element here of the problem that we saw in the Ash Plains in I think, as I say, in part 2, when we observed ruins that have been laid out in the plains. They're almost like a folly in some respect, like fake ruins in order to populate the landscape, because there is an element here of copy and paste. The ruins are basically, they share some very similar physical attributes and assets. In particular, this shape here. So take note of this pitched roof with these two supporting beams, the hole in the wall, the window, and then this incredibly interesting narrow structure here, considering the pitch of the roof above, the sort of pitching away there, and then this collapsed beam here. This structure, with the snapped planks on top as well, repeats quite a lot in this area, and that really belies the way in which the game designers constructed this particular set of ruins. This is, as it were, a copy and paste job, but that is a legitimate observation when you're sort of playing a computer game as an archaeologist. We're just as interested in how the game designers decided to construct this place as we are in the in-game history of this place as well. But it is a bit of a shame that you can tell, as it were. So, for example, let's see, over here, beyond this building, we will see that structure copied and pasted. So the two struts, the hole in the wall, the window, the narrow corridor, the pitched roof, and then the log leading up onto the ceiling. So it's a bit of a shame. It kind of, for me at least, as someone who professionally, as it were, spots patterns in architecture and the stories that they might tell, that does somewhat diminish the story that we can see here. But the story is legitimately curious, in so much as, look, there's another collapsed tree. Look at the size of that one. Huge. You can see the roots coming down the side of this thing. And actually, the fact that the roots are there on the side of this crater just adds to the mystery. Or is this actually still the crater? Let's have a look. So this may not be the crater, because we have a fairly flat area with trees. Maybe that was an orchard or something for the village, for the Deya village. Perhaps this is... No, this is still the crater. This is the crater, and we still have the roots of the trees here. So presumably, historically, in an ancient time, something caused this geological formation. Giant trees grew around its edge. Look, there's another ruined tree up there. No, so it's the same ruined tree, it's just so huge. And then people moved in. And perhaps even, maybe they're responsible for these trees being demolished. Maybe. Oh. Found a Korok. Thank you. You find these guys everywhere. I'll just chuck that. There we go. Maybe it's the people who used to live in the Deya village that chopped down the forest. Maybe they're responsible for sort of harvesting the wood. And maybe actually, in fact, it just occurred to me, maybe they were part of a wood trading network. For example, here we have more evidence of transports. You often see these wagon ruins in and around this game, but we have one here parked up just outside a fence next to a lovely house. Again, steps leading up to a slightly higher than average stone plinth. Maybe these guys were actually actively harvesting the forest, or the ruins of this forest, and trading wood across the area. After all, actually, this location is quite convenient in terms of trade. To the west, we have the Great Plateau area, which is where we start the game. To the north, we have Hyrule Field and actually Hyrule Castle itself, which at some point in this series we'll have to visit when I'm feeling a bit braver. There are lots of monsters there. And to the east, we have, well, more villages. We have Hateno Village over here. We have the Dueling Peak Stables, so on and so forth. So maybe actually these guys were the wood providers for the area. Now, there's not a lot of evidence for them actually harvesting wood. I haven't seen any saws or any tools along those lines. But everything they're living in, sorry, is made out of wood, and indeed rather luxuriously so. It's triple planked on every wall. Then they clearly had enough wood to be getting on with. Anyway, that's the Deya Village Ruins. Lots of questions that I have, at least, and actually, I find sort of darkly amusing. Where's it gone? Here you go. Is the well for the village. Clearly, they don't need this well anymore, because the water is everywhere, and yeah, it's not quite required. But yeah, an interesting place, an interesting story all around you, and not a single word written down. This, my friends, is the definition of video game archaeology. Now next I want to move on to a small place with, I think, a much shorter, more impactful story. So here we are at the Outskirt Stables, and actually I've just been slightly confronted by Botrick here. He's just bumped into me, and my costume is concerning him, it seems. I'm dressed as Dark Link, just for the impact really. But I'm here not so much to show you the stables, but rather to show you what is up on the hillside behind the stables. This little site that we're about to visit is seemingly a slightly tragic site. Whereas other places in Hyrule have been destroyed, it seems, by war, or by the great sort of calamity that happened maybe 1,000 years before this game. No, sorry, 100 years rather, so before this game. In this instance, it looks like perhaps we have a slightly smaller scale tragedy. So we go up the hillside beyond the little shrine here, and we continue until we come across, by the trees, you just about see them, the ruins of someone's homestead. Now this, for me, has a real sort of Wild West kind of feel to it. You have in the background there some snowy cliffside, which is reminiscent of parts of, I don't know, Texas or something. The sort of stuff that you see in a John Wayne movie. You know, these dramatic hills in the background there. But this little outcrop clearly was someone's homestead. We have the remains of another wagon just here, another smaller sort of wagon or cart, clearly the shed for keeping that stuff dry, and also the remnants of hay and straw. So these people were honest, hard-working farmers eking out a living in their homestead, and something happened. A little further up the hill, slightly better vantage point perhaps to live, we see the burnt out ruins of the farmstead, and we also see the cause of that destruction, a fire Wizzrobe. That guy there is essentially a sort of a wizard spirit, a mischievous soul who is, well, immune to fire for a start. So we changed to an ice arrow, and missed him. Where's he gone? Where's he gone? There we go, got him. And he's dropped his fire rod. So with the ice arrow, we're able to dispel him, but the damage has long since been done. And this stuff here is extremely close to the sort of stuff that I'm absolutely accustomed to seeing in British archaeology. The burnt out ruins of a house, the aftermath of perhaps normally in real life archaeology actually an accident is normally followed. This stage here is followed by leaving shadows in the soil for archaeologists to find, and in particular post holes. So in the future, when archaeologists return to this spot and all this wood has rotted away, especially if this rain continues and the wind gets at this place, all that will be left behind will be sort of shades in the soil where the posts once stood. Again, I really appreciate this archaeology, but also, like I say, it tells a bit of a tragic tale. Clearly people were here trying to live out their lives. In fact, it looks like there's more than one building. There's one structure here, there's another structure here, another structure here with a well as well, and oh, what's that on the floor? A rusty shield, okay, and another structure here. So maybe it was a small hamlet, a little cliff top village, and it was clearly, well, seemingly destroyed by this fire Wizzrobe who set the whole place on fire. Now, I do also like that, and this may be entirely accidental. This may not even be. It may not even be that the artists, when they were designing this spot, did this on purpose. In so much as they may not even have instinctually done this. It may simply be a byproduct of how the land was formed when they were sort of programming this area. But I absolutely love these little shadows, these paler spots in the scorched earth here around the ruins. For me, at least, it sort of speaks of maybe a wattle and daub wall that sort of collapsed into the ground around these posts. It's actually kind of beautiful archaeology, but it's also a tragic little story. And it is, as I was saying, it is a short, sharp story. It's not there's not as much to interpret here, but I think there's an awful lot more to empathise with. I can imagine living here and having it sadly taken away from me. Now, once again, we do have that element of copy and paste. So we have this 3 struts with a corner sort of top planks going on there, and a larger strut, and then over here we have a slightly sort of mirrored version of that, 3 corner uprights with a top with 3 uprights with a corner top planks and a larger strut, and then once again 3 with corner top planks and a larger strut. So again, you can see how they've designed this area, how they've constructed this effect. 3 again with an upright top here, and no, sorry, with a top. I keep on getting myself muddled up. 3 uprights with a corner top plank and a larger upright just here. You can see how they've achieved this in that sense by taking these assets and rotating them, copying and pasting them into the landscape. But again, I don't mind. I really don't mind. The effect is here, and it's relatively rare to see in a computer game storytelling using ruins. All these ruins have identities, and they have little things that set them apart from different places in this world. And just typical, isn't it? Just as I'm about to leave, it stops raining. But yeah, hopefully this may actually be one of my favourite archaeological sites in Hyrule, or in this computer game, just because of how it represents a stage in an archaeological site that we don't ever really get to see. As archaeologists, we come across maybe the post holes long after something's rotted away or something's been deliberately destroyed after, so basically normally people would come along and they'd knock all this stuff down and start building again, and then what we see is the shadows in the ground. We'd never really get to see this stage of decay and rot and destruction. As I've said in the past, I'd love to be able to go back in time to the post-Roman world, to see Britain in particular, parts of Britain, after the Romans had left, and after the population density seemingly dropped a little bit, certainly in those areas, and we know that buildings were collapsing, because that's not normally tolerated in human society. Normally, if something's collapsing, we either repair it or we wipe it away and we start again. Anyway, I'm going to move on, and the final site I want to show you today is in fact a forgotten site. So here we are in Tagara Canyon, and this canyon is quite a significant scar on the landscape in Breath of the Wild. It's a huge gash in the map all the way up here in the north western area, and down below us is some significant archaeology. In fact, we are just above a temple. In fact, the temple is called the Forgotton Temple. On the map, when you do come across it, finally, the Forgotton Temple is there for us to see. And here we are currently above the thing. This is actually the roof, and I want you to pay attention to this structure here. We have these sort of grids laid out with these sort of circular things, kind of like you can imagine maybe in an Art Deco building, the circles would contain glass domes, perhaps, to let light in. Or perhaps maybe it's a little bit reminiscent of a Lego brick, you know, that kind of thing. But nonetheless, remember that. And also remember the fact that at the end of this canyon, above the temple, we have all of these collapsed stones. This huge collapse, in fact. I can't help but wonder whether or not these rocks were deliberately or magically or explosively caused to collapse upon this structure. So we have the top of the temple, and over here it's quite a big building. So I have to run. I do love the noises that Link makes when he does things like running. Over here we have the front of the temple, and it seems to me that that even before there was a collapse, whether or not these rocks were caused to collapse on this temple deliberately, because it did cause some destruction. You can see here where some of the blocks have been torn away from the temple when boulders have fallen. Either way, at some point this temple was in a canyon, or rather, sorry, it has always seemingly been in a canyon, because out in front of it we have these two huge, well, actually more than two, four by the look of it, but two pillars marking the beginning of this sort of avenue leading towards the temple. And just look at the scale of it. It's absolutely huge. This is monumental, truly monumental architecture in Hyrule. I'm just going to pick up this stone here. I think it might be a Korok. Yep. Hello. There we go. Cool. I'll just throw the boulder away. So truly monumental building. And it is building. Look, you can see these are chunks of stone that have been held together by mortar. This isn't carved out of rock. And these two pillars and their two twins just over there, or one twin, maybe the other twin's collapsed. Just there it is, yeah, the base of the twins there. Mark the entrance to the temple beyond. This is very reminiscent, I think you'll agree, of Petra in the real world, an iconic archaeological site that appeared in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. It's that structure at the end there. This is very reminiscent of that. And well, I mean, I know what's inside, but it does make you wonder, what on earth is inside? What does this thing contain? Why go through such efforts to construct and then potentially deliberately hide this place? And what could possibly warrant such devotion? Now, this architecture here is unlike really almost anything else we see in Hyrule. This is actually, or anything else we see on this map, if you know what I mean. This architecture is in fact reminiscent of architecture that we see in a place called Skyloft in the game Skyward Sword. The size of the pillars, the colour of the stone, the use of certain motifs is extremely reminiscent of Skyward Sword, and there's a very good reason for that, which we will identify momentarily. So that's inside the temple, just over there. I just want to have another look at the outside here. It's a truly impressive structure. And again, this is absolutely storytelling. This is telling you something about the effort that went into housing whatever is inside, and also the fact that it was placed in this very impressive approach gives you a sense of that as well. Just as, for example, at Petra, you're meant to be, presumably meant to be impressed. You're meant to have questions as you approach. Now, this whole temple area has been infested with monsters, with these guardian robots. You can see all these lasers pointing at me now. They're going to fire at me any second. Ah! Phew, they missed me. Shall we give it a go? Shall we try and get through? Okay. Let's run. And can we duck behind the laser? No, we can't. Oh! I'm going to get killed. Now, this obviously is not a hazard that most archaeologists face in their typical excavations. Jump and glide. but it is nonetheless a hazard of archaeology in Hyrule. As we make our way through this temple, and hopefully we won't get hit by any lasers. Drop. Oh, phew. We have successfully traversed the hallway. I'll get myself out of the line of sight there. There we go. And what's interesting is that on the floor, it's not obvious that people are meant to be able to access this place. Though that's not a floor down there. There are in fact holes in the ground, and the pillars go down into those holes. There's been a deliberate separation of the space outside and the space that we're approaching. And okay, so these guardians of robots have taken up residence here, and or maybe even they were placed here to guard what was inside. That's an interesting question. But clearly, unless you can glide, as I've just been gliding, you can't get through here. This is designed to limit access in the most monumentally impressive way. And notice how the ceiling does mirror the structure that we saw outside and above as well. I quite like that. Anyway, as we continue, more of them. Okay, let's see, can we do this? Up, drop. Oh God! Oh. Okay, so I used up an extra life type thing. But here we are now on solid ground, in a place where you can land, and there are pillars all around us. These things are actually less monumental than the larger structures you see on the wall, for example, just there. Is there an area where it could be where... Oh, there you go. You see on the wall, for example, just there. But these smaller pillars are clearly intended to sort of welcome and guide you, perhaps, towards your final destination in this place. Dare I say, it's almost like approaching the sanctuary of a medieval cathedral or a classical temple. And as you pass here beyond a stone screen, not unlike a rood screen in a church, separating, as it were, the sanctuary, the holy of holies, from the rest of the building, we approach here, if we ignore that blue shrine, a goddess statue. This is, in fact, the goddess statue. This is a statue that played a very important role in the game Skyward Sword, and that's why this architecture is so reminiscent of that game. This is actually the statue, it seems, that landed here and kicked off this entire civilization that we see in this game. These guys had their beginnings out on this spot, in this moment, in this place where this huge statue landed out of the sky. Now, if you want to know more about that, there's plenty of information on the internet for you to look up. But having played Skyward Sword, this sort of gives me a twinge of sort of nostalgia, but also it speaks of in this game tens of thousands of years of history starting from here, and no wonder they constructed this monumental temple all around this space. In Skyward Sword, actually, the statue lands in a very open space, in a sort of canyon, in fact, actually, come to think of it, or very close to one at least. So these people decided to not only create a monument on the floor around it, but actually to encase everything, encase the very space, the air, in fact, surrounding this moment and this spot. This is possibly, the most sacred place for the history of this civilization in all of Hyrule. And the structure really reflects that. This screen here ultimately guarding access, guarding certainly the ability to see the statue from a distance, and beyond the screen a slightly less guarded area, well, if you ignore these robots, where if you are able to glide all the way through this temple, you'll be greeted by a little avenue of pillars that will guide you towards your ultimate goal. Whoop. There we go. I don't want to get shot again. There we go. So, even the monumental archaeology in this game is, I think, quite well thought out. And perhaps I think the collapse that happened above, that could have been something that just happened over time, or it could in fact be a result of tens of thousands of years of conflict and magical stuff happening and robots turning up and all that sort of stuff. This area, while not as dramatic in terms of, I suppose, the personal impact of the archaeology compared to, say, the last place we saw, and not as for me, interestingly, archaeologically. For example, you know, this monument is what it is. You simply have to walk around and interpret it. You can't imagine finding, for example, post holes and things like that in the ground. It is nonetheless here to be interpreted, and I love it. I really do. And hopefully you've enjoyed this too. So there you have it, part 5 of the Archaeology of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Now, I do have some ideas for a couple of additional episodes, but I'd like to do a bit more exploration and interpretation of those places before I commit it to a video. So you might have to wait a little bit between now and then. But rest assured that they are interesting in different ways. So I want to have a bit of time just to think about what it is that I'm looking at. But hopefully you're enjoying this series. I absolutely am, and if nothing else, it's a wonderful excuse to come back and explore this gorgeous world, this gorgeous game, Zelda Breath of the Wild. As ever, guys, until next time, do take care. Bye bye.